She stood on the back of this wagon like an animal on exhibit, head wrapped in a burlap sack, feet cut and bleeding into the wood slats, wrists tied like a felon. And the worst thing? They were auctioning her off, joking about it. $1, a stout man hollered, spitting the words out like a joke. A real savage, yours for life. The mob thundered, old men with the stench of whiskey on their breath, young men with dust in their boots and the devil not in their hearts. Caleb Morgan stood on the perimeter, pounding heart in chest. He'd witnessed horror before, in Gettysburg mud, in the dying boy's eyes. But this was evil with spectators. He should have gotten out. Guys like him were meant to keep their heads down, act dumb. Let the world crumble on its own terms. But then, she tripped. Just once. Knees buckling under the load of the shame. That was it. $1, Caleb said. Flat, calm, cutting through the din. The crowd fell silent, as if someone had slapped the air out of them. The seller sneered. Sold to the solitary farmer. He spat on the ground. Caleb got up on the wagon, cut the ropes, pulled the sack off. He was expecting fear. He was expecting a broken, hollow thing. Instead, he saw defiance. Eyes blazing like hot coals. Shoulders back. Not afraid. Not broken. That expression would haunt him for the rest of his days. The drive home was silent. Not because Caleb was being mysterious. He simply didn't know what to say. He'd been by himself 7 years, since Mary had died. Silence was his best friend. Now that silence was beating a heart. She didn't weep, didn't say thank you, didn't question where they were headed. Just followed his horse barefoot, not faltering, not flinching. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting on the horizon. The ranch appeared smaller than he recalled, nearly embarrassed about it. Caleb was the same. You can bunk in the barn, he told her, indicating. There's water in there. She didn't answer. That evening, Caleb lay awake. He sensed her out there in the darkness. The next day, he left coffee and bread on the porch. By lunchtime, the plate was spotless. They didn't speak for 3 days, but imperceptible changes crept in. One day, the broken latch on his gate was fixed better than he'd ever done it himself. Another day, a ripped shirt of his was sewn up tidy, as if it had just been purchased from the store. Caleb began to speak. Not to her precisely, but into the air. About the cows. About the sky. About the pain in his knee. She never replied, but she was attentive nonetheless. And then the storm hit. Dark clouds moving quickly, wind screaming like a train, lightning splitting the heavens. Caleb sprinted to the barn to corral the cattle in, and spotted her waiting in the doorway, gazing out at the storm as if it were an old adversary. Get in here, he bellowed. She didn't budge. Not until the lightning flashed near enough to shake her bones. He took her elbow, dragged her toward the cabin, locked the door behind them. Both of them dripping wet, panting, hands on hips, faces red. And for the first time he noticed fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, not fear of the storm, fear of something else, something larger. Things changed after that night. The distance between them started to close. Each morning, Caleb still left coffee and cornbread on the porch. Now she would sit on the steps to eat. Not close, but not hiding anymore. He found out her name not from her mouth, but from a sketch on the ground next to a neat saddle he had assumed was lost weeks before. Prairie Flower. Page 47 in Mary's old textbook of botany. Ayana. In the Comanche language, eternal bloom. The morning after, he whispered it gently as he put down the plate. Ayana. She didn't respond, but from that point forward, her gaze lingered on him a beat longer every time. A few days thereafter, she finally addressed him. Caleb. One word, but it struck him like a sledge. His name, years spent hearing it in no voice but his own. They didn't require many words after that. They restored the ranch in tandem, her hands in the kitchen, his on the earth. He read to her by candlelight in the evenings. Occasionally she'd chuckle when he got a word wrong. They weren't barely holding on anymore. They were constructing something worth holding on to. She stood on that wagon like a discarded fragment of the world. head covered in a burlap bag, bare feet making smears of blood on the wood planks, wrists tied in front like she was some sort of criminal to be paraded. And the men? They were bidding on her, not like a person, like a thing. $1, shouted a flabby man, a laugh straining in his throat. A true savage. Yours to keep forever. The audience roared its approval. Weathered old men with faces wrinkled from the sun and liquor, young vagrants with dust on their feet and nothing in their eyes. On the periphery of that circle stood Caleb Morgan. His heart pounded like a war drum. He'd witnessed darkness before, on the Gettysburg mud-churned fields, in the empty stare of boys dying. But this worse. This was evil with witnesses. This is where most men quit. Keep your head down. Act like you didn't see. Let the world go to hell. Caleb came close to doing it. Close. Then the girl's knees gave way just once, under the burden of shame. That was enough. Sold for $1, Caleb said, his tone level almost low. The crowd fell still. The auctioneer sneered. Sold to the lonely farmer, he taunted. And in an instant, Caleb ascended the wagon, severed the rope, yanked off the sack, and stood transfixed. He thought to see a victim, an empty shell. What he saw was defiance. Eyes that blazed like hot embers, shoulders set, unbroken, unafraid. That gaze would stay with him the rest of his life. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her history. But the moment he severed that rope, he purchased more than a woman. He purchased a war he wasn't prepared for. The trip home was quiet. Not the comfortable sort of silence Caleb had become accustomed to after 7 years all alone following Mary's death. This silence thumped. She didn't say a word, didn't weep, didn't offer thanks. She simply walked behind his horse, bare feet, as if rocks and dust were irrelevant. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the property was smaller, somehow embarrassed. Caleb indicated the barn. You stay there, he said. She didn't show any indication she'd heard him. For days, not a word was exchanged between them. Yet something did start to shift. A latch on a gate was tightened better than he'd ever tightened one. A ripped shirt was sewn like new. He began speaking, not to her so much but out loud about the cows, the weather, the pain in his knee. No replies were forthcoming, but he knew she was listening. Then the storm. Dark clouds, wind as a freight train. Caleb dashed out to round up the cattle, and spotted her in the doorway of the barn, her eyes fixed on the sky as if it were an enemy she recognized by name. Get in, he shouted. She didn't budge until lightning ripped the air. Caleb pulled her arm, pulled her into the cabin, and shut the door. They were there, drenched, panting, and for the first time he caught sight of fear in her eyes. Not a fear of him, not a fear of the world, a fear of something deeper. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was human. Day after day, he set coffee and cornbread on the porch. By noon, the plate was spotless. Gradually, she started hanging around on the porch steps, still quiet but not in hiding anymore. One day, Caleb discovered an old saddle, one he had assumed he had lost, set on the porch railing. Beside it, scratched in the dust, was a prairie flower. He took Mary's old botany book off the shelf that evening. Page 47, Ayana. In the Comanche language, it translated to eternal bloom. The following morning, as he put her plate in front of her, he whispered it, Ayana. She didn't wince, but her gaze lingered an extra second. Days later, she uttered his name, Caleb, a single word, firm, soft, but it froze him in his tracks. They didn't require many words. They fixed the ranch together slowly. He read to her at night by the light of fires, stumbling over yellowed pages. Occasionally, she smiled when he misread a word. It was something slow, something honest. One night, while he was honing a hoe, she settled her hand on his. No words, just warmth. He didn't know that she would later wish that he had been honing a rifle, because peace never warns you it's leaving. Small towns ferment whispers. In Rob Bend, whispers about Caleb and the Comanche woman became stories. Some referred to it as scandal, others a joke. But to Garrett Sloan, the man who had brought Ayanna to town in the first place, it was personal. Caleb had embarrassed him in public. And a man like Garrett doesn't forget. A dusty afternoon, Caleb spotted the dust cloud of riders in the distance. "Ayanna," he bellowed, quiet but cutting. "Inside. Lock the door." She moved without hesitation. The riders rode hard. Garrett in the lead. "Afternoon, Vance," he snarled. "Heard you've been playing house with stolen merchandise." "She's not stolen," Caleb said, voice steady. "She's my wife." Garrett laughed, hard and cruel. "You think that makes a difference? She's property of the town. We bought her once. We'll reclaim her now." Caleb had his rifle in his hands. "She's not leaving." And then the door groaned. Ayanna emerged, carrying the blue calico shawl he'd once left for her. She stood alongside him. No weapon, no threat, just being. Garrett noticed something in their eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but the kind of unbreakable resolve. He gave way. When the dust had settled, Caleb nodded at Ayanna. The peril was over. Something else had moved in, though that was stronger.